What is up, everybody? Mr. Curtis here. Welcome to part 3 of the modern era on nationalism and the decline of imperialist empires. Just a quick reminder, when we're talking about imperialism from the last time period, these are the European countries as well as the United States who are going out and conquering the world, forcing their beliefs, social Darwinism, white man's burden, need economic resources for factories, all that good stuff. And after World War II, we see the decline of these empires. We talked about India in the last video as kind of the example from which to use. A lot of those same ideas carry over to other places, but India was our example. I just want to go over a couple nationalism issues in other areas, some ideas, some concepts. So let's get rock and rolling here. Here's what we got. First is in a lot of these newly independent states, so as states free themselves from imperialistic rule after World War II, and it doesn't happen everywhere at once. It's kind of this almost domino effect where countries in certain regions start gaining their independence, and then other countries want it. So we see this kind of connection between countries. Some countries after World War II are going to take what we call like a strong role in economic life. We do not necessarily in all these countries see laissez-faire, hands-off capitalism where there's a free market and anyone can do whatever they want and the government stays out of economic life. A lot of countries are going to take kind of a hands-on approach. And we're not talking necessarily like totalitarianism in economic life where the government decides everything. But we're going to see the government take control of certain important resources and taking the profits from those resources. And one of the examples is in Egypt. And the president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt is right here. This is in North Africa, of course. And there is this Suez Canal that was built in the previous time period. This was a colony of the British. The British helped build this canal, and the British profit significantly off this canal because the canal, as we talked about in one of the other videos, is going to link India in the Indian Ocean up into the Mediterranean Sea here, and it allows to pretty much cuts the time in half to ship goods from India back to Europe. So what's going to occur here is, as the result of Suez Canal, when you go through the Suez Canal, you got to pay a fee. It's like a toll, and it's expensive. And when the British free themselves, or when the Egyptians free themselves from British rule under Nasser, who was the president in the 50s, he's going to nationalize the Suez Canal. And what it means to nationalize is the profits from that canal go directly to the government. The government then takes those profits and distributes those resources, ideally distributes those resources to the people of the country. So we're nationalizing an important resource here, which is the Suez Canal. We see it in other areas as well. It's not just Egypt, where other areas will say like mining, iron is one of our main resources. What we're going to do is we are going to nationalize that, take control of that for ourselves, so we actually profit off of it. For example, in Latin America, Chile, which is on the west coast of South America, they have a lot of copper, and the national government, or the government's going to say, we're going to nationalize this after World War II, especially. And so we see a lot of governments are going to nationalize this, especially in independent states in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. So second thing here, we're also going to see what we call transnational movements. Trans means across. So when you see the root of that word trans, it goes across, and this is national, so across nations. It's not just specific to one country, it goes across countries. And we see a couple transnational movements, not specific to one location. You can find them anywhere, and two specific ones, and there's a bunch of them, but these are kind of two specific ones. One is called Pan-Africanism. This actually pops up after World War I. So it's a movement in the 1900s or the 20th century. And Pan-Africanism is the idea that anyone who is of African descent, no matter where you live, whether you're African-American in the United States, whether you're what they would call Afro-Caribbean, people who are of African descent in the Caribbean, whether you're Afro-Brazilian, whether you're from Africa itself, that there should be and there is a unity amongst these people. And Pan-Africanism, think pancake, panoramic picture, like trans, it spreads across. So this is Pan-Africanism. And the goal was that all African people, no matter where you live, almost in the minds of Pan-Africanism, they are oppressed. And this is right before the time of imperialism ending, and that all African people need to unite together to free themselves from European discrimination or American discrimination, and that everyone should be part of each other's movement in order to do that. So the other transnational movement we see is Zionism. Zionism refers to people of Jewish ancestry who are across different countries, and that makes it transnational, that they are united. And the movement of Zionism was to promote and to ask for and to get their own country. So the people of Jewish descent who are all around the world, that happened during the Roman Empire with the diaspora. We see people spread out. And obviously we have the treatment of Jews during World War II under the Nazi Empire. But Zionism is the idea that all these people are united, that the Zionists want to gain their own country, which is called Israel. And they want to reclaim this holy land, the land that is holy to them. And in the Torah is promised to them by God, that God promised them this land. And after World War II, they're going to actually get their own country called Israel. The problem with getting it and the conflict that comes about as a result of it is there are people who already live there who are called Palestinians. So we see a conflict there with this Zionist movement and the creation of a country in the Middle East surrounded by other Muslim countries. So you plop this Jewish country in the middle of Muslim countries and you kick some of the Muslims who live there out of their land, and it causes some conflict that we still see today in the Middle East. Also, we're going to see movements as a result, like these nationalist movements to redistribute land. So coming back to this resource thing with Egypt, some of these countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America are going to really advocate for communism and socialism. So you have these really, like in Latin America, for example, you have these super, super wealthy people and this huge gap between these really, really wealthy people and these really, really poor people. And the wealthy people are a very small fraction and the poor people make up the vast majority of people. So some people are going to get elected in Latin America, especially. We see it in Asia and Africa as they gain their independence from imperialism, that people are going to say, let's redistribute resources. Let's take the landowner's land away and redistribute it to the poor peasants so they actually have land to work on. Let's take the national resources of, like I said before, copper, and let's redistribute it to people. In some ways, this is socialism and communism, and the U.S. doesn't like that this happens. So we're going to see is a lot of U.S. intervention in Latin America to try and stop these communist ideas of taking land and money from the rich people and giving it to the poor people. And at its root, that is communism. So some of these leaders are going to be democratically elected saying, I'm going to redistribute land, which is communist in its idea, but they get elected democratically. And with the Cold War, the U.S. says, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to intervene? Because it sounds like it's communist, but they're democratically elected. And a lot of times this is going to cause conflict within Latin America itself. All this stuff in Latin America goes back to the Peninsulares and the Creoles, and a lot of this land has been passed down from generation, and the vast majority of people want to redistribute it. So we do see this redistribution of land. One other example of a nationalist movement that pops up is in South Africa. South Africa in the post-World War I through World War II has this system in place called apartheid, and it really it reaches its peak in 1946, so right after World War II. As these countries are asking for their independence after World War II, South Africa kind of clamps down, and the apartheid system that's set up segregates whites and blacks. So white people make up about 10% of South Africans' population. Black people make up about 90%. And the white government, which only makes up 10%, puts these very strict segregation laws. So obviously segregation with bathrooms and parks and water fountains and trains. But we also see segregation in terms of who you can marry. You can't marry interracially. They also, if you're non-white, you have to carry a pass around. You also, the school system is going to be worse for blacks than whites, and it's all segregated. Also, most importantly, black people cannot vote in elections. Only white people can. So we have this segregated political system. We have segregated economic system. We also have a segregated land. So the white people generally get the good land. The black people get the bad land. It's hard to move up. And the nationalist movement that pops up is what's called the African National Congress, very similar to the Indian National Congress that was led by Gandhi, a little synthesis there. And this is going to protest the treatment. The leader of this movement is Nelson Mandela. He is going to be arrested in the 1960s. He's thrown in jail for trying to protest against the government. He is in jail he's in jail for 26 years for protesting against the government and being part of this ANC, or African National Congress. And in 1992, not that long ago, the apartheid system officially ends and black South Africans got the right to vote. They actually elected Mandela, who was released from prison a couple years before, the first black president of South Africa. This anti-apartheid movement, before it ended, was global. A lot of people protested buying goods from South Africa. They protested the apartheid treatment, especially in the 80s. And it's successful, and it ended, but there's still you can imagine a lot of issues today as a result of this system that have been in place. One last thing, just a map here. This is the imperialism map of Africa. So take a look at it. You see it? See it? Okay, this is the map here. This is the current borders and the dates of independence in Africa. You'll notice part of the problem is that a lot of these borders that were drawn by Europeans during imperialism are the same borders today. So you can kind of see the similarities. And a lot of these places are going to have a lot of tension as a result of these borders because the Europeans really didn't care who lived here. The goal wasn't to split it up based on ethnic groups. We just dumped a lot of people in here. And the people who are there kind of say, we don't like this either. And when they gain their independence, it's going to cause tension within these countries because you might have 4, 5, 6 different ethnic groups living together in one country who don't necessarily like each other. And when they gain their independence, there's a lot of conflict. So 2 different maps here, but the maps are very similar, even though they're 70 or 80 years apart. And you also notice that most countries in in Africa are going to gain their independence after World War II in the 50s and 60s. A little synthesis there as well. So that's what I got. Kind of a little wrap up on nationalism. We'll talk more about in class. As always, questions, let me know. Have a good day.